In this episode, we are going to be covering conditional statements. To begin, what are conditional statements? Conditional statements are statements in programming that carry out a different function depending on certain conditions. Essentially, if the statement is dependent on a certain variable, then if the variable, for instance, is an integer and is 5, then it may do one thing, while if it has a value of 6, then it may do another thing. The main type of conditional statement that programmers use is the if statement. It is as simple as it sounds. If some condition is true, then carry out the instructions located within the if statement's brackets. In a previous video, I said that booleans are very useful when it comes to conditional statements. This is because when an if statement is written, if boolean, then the statement will go through if the boolean is true and will not carry out its instructions and will be bypassed if the boolean is false. However, you can also compare two values in an if statement, the comparison returning true if it is true and false if not. The if statement comes with two more statements to go with it, else if and else. Else if is a conditional statement used directly after an if statement and carries out mainly the same function as an if statement. However, the else if statement will only be evaluated if the preceding if or else if statement is bypassed due to its condition being false. The else if statement will then evaluate its own condition, and if it is true, then it will carry out the instructions listed within its brackets. We then have the else statement. The else statement once again comes after an if or an else if statement and will carry out its instructions no matter what, as long as the preceding statements are evaluated as false. Another very useful conditional statement is the switch statement. A switch statement is functionally similar to multiple if and else if statements together. You'd write a switch statement in the form of switch variable, and then below this have many cases that the variable could be. For instance, for switch x, there could be a 5 case, and then the instructions listed under that case and before a break statement will be carried out if the variable were to have a value of 5. This is very useful because you're able to essentially use many if and else if statements without having to write nearly as much as you would have to otherwise. And finally, why are these statements so useful? Well, many times, programmers want their programs to function differently, depending on different conditions. For instance, a program could function differently depending on the information that the user inputs, such as allowing a user to use a program or not use a program if they are above or below 18 years old, respectively. Also, a program might change color scheme depending on the time of day. Or even more simply, if a user presses a button that's meant to move on to another screen in an app, the programmer would only want the app to change screens if the user clicks that button. A program without conditional statements would do the same thing every time, and would be very primitive compared to the one that could change depending on its conditions. In the next episode, we will be covering arrays. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you want to see the rest of the series, check out the playlist linked to the right. Thanks for watching.